Can't decide?
There's got to be something here that you like.
For Koreans, rice is foundational. It's a staple and the centerpiece to all meals in Korea. There's bibimbap, rice mixed with vegetables, gukbap, rice in hot soup, and kimbap is the demand around the world.
For me, it's noodles over rice. Korea has amazing noodle dishes. Chuy ramen and cold naengmyeon to blow away the heat. A meat lover here, pork, beef, chicken. I like them all. Did you know that bulgogi is listed in the English dictionary? There's also the famous chimek, chicken and beer, which is the best combo for a night out with friends.
Surrounded by the sea on three sides, Korea has a great selection of seafood, from raw fish to piping hot seafood soups. It's mouth-watering just talking about it. The two pillars of Korean condiments, gochujang and soy sauce.
Ooh, what do you prefer?
Gochujang. I like anything made with gochujang. In general, Koreans love spicy food.
I prefer the soy sauce base. There's something about the salty and sweet that hits the right spot. I think even those who are trying Korean food for the first time will really like it.
But that's not all.
We can't leave out the street food. If you're in Korea, it's a must-try. They are both treats for your eyes and mouth.
How about it? Mouth-watering, right?
Korean food, you've got to try it. Discover a whole new world of flavors.
Maybe I gotta do, yeah. I can't see a number. Can somebody help me? It's your imagination. Maybe I gotta do. I can't see a number. Can somebody? As I carry on with all that I am, I won't let you down, yeah. That's family I'm singing for. With all that I am, I'll be there with you. Open up your heart, I will dance with you, oh my lover. We can finally feel.
Here. It was very important for Korean people during that time to get their freedom back.
Outbound shipments from South Korea came to around $59.8 billion last month, the highest for any June on record. Strong global demand for semiconductors and automobiles led to the all-time high result. After ruling out the possibility of extending the July 9 tariffs deadline, the White House says President Donald Trump will meet with his trade team this week to finalize tariff rates for countries. Sweltering heat is blanketing the entire country. The daily average temperature in Daegu came to 30.7 degrees Celsius on Monday, while Busan saw 26.2 degrees, the hottest day in the city for June since the data began being collected in 1904. South Korea's exports made a rebound last month, in fact, posting the highest figures for any June in history, thanks to brisk chip and car shipments. Our Park Juna leads us off tonight.
Exports in June reached an all-time high of $59.8 billion, up 4.3% from a year earlier, according to data released on Tuesday by the Ministry of Trade, Industry, and Energy. Imports rose 3.3% to $50.72 billion, resulting in a trade surplus of $9.08 billion. Among the country's 15 major export items, 6 showed growth. Notably, semiconductors fueled this, marking a historic $15 billion in June, up 11.6%, and continuing a 4-month upward trend. This helped overseas shipments of semiconductors reach $73.3 billion for the first half of 2025, the highest ever performance over that period.
Previously, market demand for semiconductors was driven by mobile devices, but it has now shifted to AI and data centers. Strong memory sales, particularly high bandwidth memory, and a surge in AI data center investment are the fundamental drivers behind the recent growth in semiconductor exports.
Automobile shipments also hit an all-time high for June at $6.3 billion, marking a 2.3% increase from a year earlier. Robust deliveries were driven by high EU demand for electric vehicles and a whopping 67.9% surge in used car exports to $670 million. By region, June exports saw growth in 7 of its 9 major trading regions, excluding the United States and China. Although exports to the United States and China saw a slight decrease of 0.5% and 2.7% respectively, exports to regions such as the European Union and the Middle East saw a significant increase of over at least 14%. The economic experts stated that the drop in exports to the United States and China reflects a shift in the global trading order.
The drop in exports after Trump's tariff hikes is a major setback, especially since exports were expected to rise. South Korea exports intermediate goods to China, which China then ships as final products to the U.S. So tariffs on China hit us too. As existing markets shrink, we naturally look for new ones, leading to a shift in the trading order, with more exports heading outside the U.S. and China.
In the meantime, Trade Minister An Deok-keun said the government plans to respond proactively to the immediate challenges in the Korea-U.S. negotiations and will soon prepare export support measures such as trade financing and the identification of alternative markets to minimize the negative impact on industries. Park Juna, Arirang News.
So the record high export figures from June are a relief for now, but chip and car exports, the backbone of South Korean economy, may soon be challenged following the end of the Trump administration's tariffs grace period. So how to brace for the potential impact? Our Kim Do-yeon reports.
The stakes couldn't be higher as South Korea's heavy dependence on exports, especially to the United States, leaves its core industries vulnerable. With the July 8th deadline fast approaching, Seoul is racing to secure a deal that shields its automakers and semiconductor producers from hefty new tariffs.
I believe Korea needs to emphasize that its economic growth leads to more factories and jobs being created in the United States, and use that to steer negotiations in a direction that benefits both countries.
Recent moves by Hyundai Motor Group underscore that point, with the company pledging over $21 billion in investments across the U.S. over the next 3 years. The move perhaps testifies to experts' claims that autos are the most exposed. Under Section 232 of the U.S. Trade Expansion Act, Washington currently slaps a 25% tariff on imported vehicles and auto parts, a duty both Korea and Japan have been pushing to reduce.
Among all the tariffs Korea faces from the U.S. right now, the most critical issue is the auto sector. If this isn't resolved, we're likely to see significant damage, not just for finished cars, but also for parts, steel, and aluminum, since all these tariffs are heavily concentrated on automobiles.
Without a breakthrough, Korea's automakers and a web of suppliers could suffer severe losses. Some experts suggest that ramping up local manufacturing in the U.S. may be the most immediate way to cushion the blow.
By using production facilities over there, we can effectively offset tariffs on parts as well. So at this point, I think expanding and maximizing manufacturing operations in the U.S., rather than producing everything domestically, is actually the best alternative we have.
But they caution this could mean fewer jobs and contracts for Korea's own factories and parts makers. That's why experts say tariffs will ultimately need to be tackled at the negotiating table. They point out that South Korea's shipbuilding capacity could serve as leverage, while even adjustments to defense cost-sharing might come into play. Kim Do-hyun, Arirang News.
President Jae Myung presided over the weekly cabinet meeting on Tuesday. There, he urged the cabinet members to respect members of the National Assembly who have been selected by the people. Now, also addressed were a host of issues related to people's livelihoods. Our top office correspondent Yoon Jung-min has more.
국회는 국민으로부터 직접 권력을 위임받은 기관이어서 우리 국무위원들께서 국회에 가시면 그 직접 선출된 권력에 대해서 존중감을 가져주시면 좋겠어요. 국가의 기본적 질서에 관한 문제니까.
President Jae Myung began Tuesday's cabinet meeting by noting that all power comes from the people and officials elected by the people come before those who were appointed. He pointed out that there seems to be a misunderstanding with Parliament and urged the cabinet to respect the Assembly. Present at the meeting were some of the cabinet members from the former Yoon Suk-yeol administration. He went on to pay attention to the livelihoods of the people, particularly the vulnerable, with the nation in the middle of the summer rainy season.
이게 지금 혹서기가 또래하면 어쨌든 또 뭐 쪽방이니 뭐 이런 노인 취약계층들이 또 위기를 겪습니다. 또 각별히 관심 갖도록 잘 관리해 주시기 부탁드립니다.
He also turned to another matter affecting the lives of Koreans, real estate. He said the stock and financial markets have been recently normalized and began to serve as investment options other than the property market, pointing to a tendency in Korea where speculation in real estate often leads to housing market instability. Last week, the nation's financial watchdog announced strict measures to tighten household lending to curb soaring home prices in the capital. Discussions on Tuesday included how to use some of the land left fallow in the border area of Gyeonggi-do province following the relocation of the U.S. military sites to Pyeongtaek.
President Lee instructed the Defense Ministry to proactively review and report measures to deal with the issues regarding the land returned by the U.S. Forces Korea in northern Gyeonggi-do province.
Among the items endorsed at the cabinet meeting was an agreement to establish a free trade zone between South Korea and Ecuador aimed at expanding bilateral trade and investment. Yoon Jung-min, Arirang News.
President Jae Myung spoke over the phone with his UAE counterpart Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan on Tuesday for the first time since taking office last month. President Lee expressed hopes to bolster the special strategic partnership between Korea and the UAE. The leaders agreed to strengthen bilateral cooperation on AI, cutting-edge technology, the defense industry, and nuclear power. He also held a phone call with New Zealand Prime Minister Christopher Luxon to discuss elevating their comprehensive strategic partnership. Noting New Zealand's contribution during the Korean War, he hoped to bolster cooperation with the country in the economic, defense, and science sectors. He also discussed with the foreign leaders further cooperation in time for the upcoming APEC summit here in Korea later this year. First Lady Kim Hye-kyung on Tuesday attended the opening ceremony of the 4th edition of Women Entrepreneurs Week. There, she expressed hope that women in business who've played a key role in supporting the domestic economy will help to lead a country through challenges. According to the top office, the First Lady met with female entrepreneurs to offer encouragement and presented government awards to exemplary businesswomen. The Ministry of SMEs and Startups hosts events each year during the first week of July to recognize outstanding contributions by women-led businesses. Now, this year's program runs through Friday. It's been 1 month since President Jae Myung took office. It's still early days, but we zoom in on the course of his foreign affairs and security policies, which he has defined as pragmatic diplomacy. For this, we have our Oh Soo-young in the studio. Welcome back, Soo-young.
Hi, Tammy. It's great to be back.
So, Soo-young, it's been 1 month. How would you summarize the first month of his so-called pragmatic diplomacy?
Well, Tammy, I think it's been quite an interesting mix of both continuity and change from the previous Yoon administration. In being pragmatic, the Lee government has clearly kept Seoul's global diplomacy intact at his first multilateral summit at the G7. Now, holding at least 10 individual summits with world leaders, his focus was to reinforce South Korea's position in the international community as a vibrant democratic partner. After 6 months of a leadership vacuum following former President Yoon Suk-yeol's martial law crisis last year. Now, there's continuity, too, in South Korea's strategic relationships. His first phone calls with world leaders were made in the order of the US, Japan, and then China. Now, that's really interesting, as it mirrors the previous Yoon administration's priorities, emphasizing the South Korea-US alliance, as well as a future-oriented partnership with Tokyo. That's been quite surprising, given how past progressive leaders have shown more affinity towards China than Japan, emphasizing historical disputes with the latter. Now, where there's been some recalibration is when it comes to values. Now, the former Yoon administration endorsed liberal democratic values as the basis for cooperation. But the new Lee Jae-myung administration has indicated that it will focus on what serves Korean interests, not necessarily values. So that includes diversifying its cooperation and working with countries like China and Russia, avoiding this so-called bloc-based mentality. On North Korea, Lee's strategy is clearly geared towards lowering tensions. Even in the first month of his presidency, he decided to withhold psychological warfare tactics such as loudspeaker broadcasts along the border, and he's initiated crackdowns on South Korean groups, sending anti-North Korea regime flyers over the border. So all of this is a very sharp contrast to the tit-for-tat escalation under the previous administration.
Indeed, and his top policymakers will initiate this pragmatic diplomacy. Let's turn to his ministerial nominees for key defense, diplomatic, and security positions. What does his selection of ministers really indicate?
Right, so President Lee Jae-myung's picks for the ministers of foreign affairs, unification and defense, it really represents a decisive pivot, I would say, towards the institutional experience and also peace rather than deterrence towards North Korea. Now, Foreign Minister nominee Cho Yeon is a career diplomat with decades of experience in multilateral diplomacy. He's emphasized the importance of diversifying Korea's diplomatic interests, and speaking during an interview, Cho said that it was time to move beyond what he called the stereotype that diplomacy for South Korea begins and ends with the United States. But at the same time, he's acknowledged America's centrality in building peace with North Korea, saying that achieving the US-North Korea dialogue, or summit rather, and establishing peace on the Korean Peninsula is one of the administration's top priorities. Now, the nominee for Unification Minister Chung Dong-young is also no stranger to the inter-Korean agenda. He's held the same position during the previous Nomuyon administration, and he played a very central role in organizing the 2007 Inter-Korean Summit. And he said that he supports the possible US-North Korea talks, noting that they would help ease tensions on the Korean Peninsula and contribute to peace and stability. He's also made headlines by suggesting that the very name Ministry of Unification may be outdated and that the ministry should shift its emphasis away from the symbolic unification rhetoric and instead focus on concrete goals like humanitarian cooperation and sustainable coexistence between the South and North. Now, a particularly significant appointment is Ang Kyu-baek as Defense Minister. Now, he would be the first civilian to hold the post in more than 6 decades. His nomination represents the democratic oversight of the military, particularly after the martial law crisis last year, as well as reform to better support armed forces amid sharp technological and geopolitical changes. He's also emphasized the need for a peaceful overture between the South and North to create the mood for military tensions to be eased.
Well, Seong, last but not least, I have to ask, is the South Korea-U.S. summit still expected in late July? If so, what are the stakes?
Well, I believe so, Tammy. So officials from both governments, they've confirmed this week that a summit in Washington is being arranged, and that's most likely for the week of July 21st. And Secretary of State Marco Rubio is, in fact, widely expected, not confirmed though, by many, to stop by in Seoul earlier in July to finalize the grounds for this possible summit. And, well, the 3 issues that the 2 leaders are expected to discuss are, first of all, America's tariffs on South Korea's foremost industrial goods, especially with Washington ending its grace period next Wednesday. Also, defense spending, as the United States calls on allies to pay more towards their own security and even cover areas outside their traditional cost-sharing agreements, such as the deployment of U.S. tactical assets. Another issue could possibly be, of course, North Korea, as President Lee moves to lower tensions while President Trump signals interest in resuming his dialogue with the North Korean leader. Now, if Lee and Trump were, they were both expected to meet at the G7 summit in Canada last month, but that meeting didn't take place as the US leader left early amid the Israel-Iran conflict. So their upcoming summits, that's going to be a major test of how the Lee administration balances alliance management with South Korea's national interest.
So the first high-stakes meeting for Lee's pragmatic diplomacy. Let's see what happens later this month. Seong, thanks so much for coming in today.
Thanks very much for having me, Tammy.
It's rainy season here in Korea, but with heavy monsoon downpours taking a break, sweltering heat is on the rise. Seoul has seen its 2nd straight tropical night of the season, while a heat wave advisory remains in effect. Our Shin Ha-young has more.
South Korea continues to face heat waves and tropical nights. As of Tuesday, most parts of the country, including Seoul, were under heat advisories. The capital saw the season's first heat wave advisory being issued on Monday, just a day after it experienced its first tropical night of the summer. Monday night's temperature stayed above 25 degrees Celsius, marking the 2nd consecutive tropical night. A heat advisory is issued when the day's highest perceived temperature is expected to stay at 33 degrees Celsius or above for 2 or more days. However, Seoul's heat wave advisory came 11 days later than last year. Still, the sweltering heat is expected to remain not just in Seoul but nationwide.
As the hot and humid North Pacific high-pressure area covers our country, a large amount of hot and humid water vapor is flowing in along its edge.
The Korean Meteorological Administration raised the advisories to heat warnings on Tuesday in regions including parts of Gangwon-do, Gyeongsang-buk-do, and Jeollanam-do provinces. A heat wave warning is issued when the highest perceived temperature is expected to reach 35 degrees or higher for 2 or more consecutive days, or when major damage is expected from the heat. The sweltering heat is hitting the entire country, breaking June temperature records in many areas. According to the Korean Meteorological Administration on Tuesday, Busan recorded an average daily temperature of 26.2 degrees Celsius on Monday, the hottest day in June since records began in April 1904. Daegu also saw its hottest June day on record with an average daily temperature of 30.7 degrees Celsius, the highest since records began in January 1907. The intense heat also led to the death of a woman in her 60s who had been working in a field in Jinju, Gyeongsangnam-do province. She was found unresponsive on Sunday afternoon, with police saying they believe she died of heat stroke. The KMA advises vulnerable groups, including the elderly and children, to take extra care to stay hydrated and limit outdoor activities. 신하영, Arirang News.
After mediating the Israel-Iran ceasefire, U.S. President Donald Trump is now looking to put pressure on Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to end the Gaza war by inviting him to the White House next week. Our Pyongyang has the details.
U.S. President Donald Trump is set to host Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu at the White House next Monday as Washington ramps up efforts to end the war in Gaza. Unnamed U.S. officials confirmed the visit, which comes amid a renewed push to broker a ceasefire. White House Press Secretary Carolyn Leavitt, during a briefing on Monday, reaffirmed the administration's commitment to ending the conflict.
I also know that this administration is in constant communication with Israeli leadership, and the president himself speaks frequently, as you know, to Prime Minister Netanyahu. But this has been a priority for the president since he took office, to end this brutal war in Gaza.
Netanyahu's upcoming visit comes as the U.S., after striking Iranian nuclear sites and brokering a ceasefire between Israel and Iran, shifts focus to ending the Israel-Hamas conflict. On the same day, according to AP News, Israeli forces left at least 74 people dead in Gaza. The deadliest attack targeted a beachfront cafe crowded with women and children. It was one of the few remaining places during the war where civilians could charge their phones and access the internet.
An F-16 missile, a war missile, military aircraft, not a drone or a bomb or a shell from a boat. The F-16 shook the place. It struck this place, as you can see. Pools of blood, piles of martyrs. I mean, if you had seen the scene from the beginning, there were piles of martyrs.
Faraz Awad, a Gaza Health Ministry official, said at least 30 were killed and dozens injured in the cafe strike. Local medical officials reported 15 more deaths on a Gaza City street, 6 in a separate building strike, 11 civilians shot while searching for food, and 10 killed at a UN aid warehouse. While Israel maintains it only targets militants, Gaza's health ministry reports that more than 56,000 Palestinians, many of them civilians, have been killed since the war began. Pyongyang, Arirang News.
Seoul has recorded 2 consecutive tropical nights now. It felt as hot as 32 degrees Celsius during the day today. Not only in Seoul, heatwave warnings and advisories were issued in most parts of the country. The daytime temperature in Samcheok and Gyeongju rose up to 36 degrees during the day. This heat wave will continue tomorrow. In addition, we need to prepare for strong UV rays. High levels of ultraviolet rays will cover the skies around the country. Around the eastern and southern parts of the country, very high levels of UV rays will continue tomorrow afternoon. Tomorrow morning will be even hotter than today at around 24 to 26 degrees. Highs will move up to 32 degrees in Daejeon, 35 degrees in Daegu and Gyeongju. No rain is expected for the time being. Please take good care of your health. That's all for Korea. Here are the weather conditions around the world.
That's all we have for tonight. I'm Kim Dami. For all of us here at Arirang, thanks for watching and good night.
To set the facts straight. Get Korea right.
안녕하세요. 저는 인도네시아에서 온 방과 회원 무티아라 하이라니입니다. 반갑습니다. 인도네시아에 왔을 때 한국 드라마를 즐겨 봤어요. 그러다가 한국에 와서 대학을 다니게 됐어요. 한국 사극 드라마도 즐겨 봤어요. 왕과 왕비가 살고 그리고 신하들이 회의를 하고 그리고 궁녀들이 일하는 그런 궁궐에 관심이 생겼어요. 제가 제일 좋아하는 궁은 경복궁입니다. 그런데 AI한테 경복궁 그림을 보여달라고 했더니 그 엉뚱한 그림을 보였다는 제보가 있었어요. 예를 들면 궁 앞에 강이 있고 나룻배가 있다든지 산 꼭대기에 있다든지 이런 오해들. 제가 직접 경복궁을 소개해드릴게요. 같이 갈까요? 경복궁은 대한민국 역사와 문화의 중심지로 여겨져요. 조선시대 왕실의 그 위엄과 격식을 제대로 알 수 있는 곳이거든요. 또 경복궁은 외국인 관광객이 많이 방문하는 그 서울의 랜드마크 중 하나입니다. 제가 경복궁을 사랑하는 이유 이제 아시겠죠? 한국에 대한 잘못된 정보를 바로 찾는 일, 여러분도 함께 해주세요.
Arirang TV is conducting an overseas TV viewer survey to provide you with a better global broadcast service. Share your valuable feedback on the Arirang TV website www.arirang.com or mobile application. Survey participants will be selected at random to receive special gifts. 2025 Arirang Overseas TV Viewer Survey. We look forward to hearing from you.
Held its first debate over the weekend.
The economy is expected to expand 2.5% this year.
Korea's
Welcome to Within the Frame, where we bring the most pressing issues across the globe into focus. I'm Kim Mo-gen. This Thursday marks President Jae Myung's 30th day in office. 1 month in, he's setting a notably open tone for the presidency. From declaring himself the president for all to rolling out the people's nomination system and launching the people's mailbox, President Lee has placed citizen engagement at the heart of his early governance. With emergency economic measures also underway, his administration is signaling speed, visibility, and direct response. But as these symbolic moves begin to meet institutional reality, the question now is whether this participatory model can truly take root and what it means for the future of Korean democracy. In our first installment, marking the 1-month anniversary of Jae Myung's presidency, we take a closer look at his style of governance, how it's unfolding, what it promises, and where it may be headed. For this, we are joined in the studio by Kim Jun-mo, professor at the Department of Public Administration at Konkuk University. Welcome to the program.
My pleasure.
And also joining us online is Lee Hyun, Dean and Professor of Law at Handong International Law School. Welcome, Professor.
It's a pleasure to be back on the program.
So let's begin a discussion with Professor Kim. Let's go back to, President Lee's inaugural promise. He declared himself the president for all, and he also vowed to, break with divisive politics in the nation. How would you evaluate, Professor, the administration's, latest symbolic weight of that statement, president for all?
Yes, as you mentioned earlier, during first months, President Lee has made a lot of decisions. And among them, as we observe from his cabinet appointment, his governance philosophy of capacity, integration, and balancing were emphasized, which means his inaugural promise were reflected. So as we look at closer, for example, Minister of Science and Technology is an example of emphasizing capacity and practical orientation. He is from LG AI Institute. Also, Minister of Small and Medium Enterprise is from NAVER. And Minister of Health is former Commissioner of Disease Control and Prevention Agency. Likewise, so he is emphasizing practicality and capacity. And regarding integration, he selected 8 people from the ruling party. So that's a way to grab the control of the governance in some ways. And more importantly, balancing and also respecting the legacy of policies. For example, Minister of Patriots and Veteran Service. This person is from Hanara Party, which is the predecessor party to the People's Power Party right now. Also, Minister of Food and Drug Agency and Minister of Agriculture are from Yoon administration as well. Also, Minister of Industry, Trade and Environment has ample experience of nuclear power plant export in the past. So in one word, he is trying to coordinate his philosophy well at the moment.
Right. Professor, thank you so much for giving us a clear picture of, President Lee's latest picks on ministerial positions. So speaking of which, the people's nomination system has been introduced for the first time, and citizens are to, recommend top officials for their posts. From a public administration view, how feasible and effective do you think this, real personnel suggestion system is?
Yeah, the meaning of this system is any new government, it would face the same issue of positioning the right person at the right place. And the existing way of doing that includes using Ministry of Personnel Management database, also utilizing political network, including shadow cabinet, shadow think tank, shadow camp, and also informal recommendations. But this way, President Lee's policy is adding new layer. But this way has pros and cons. The good point first as I mentioned, adding new layer, trying to overcoming existing way of recruiting. Secondly, it is gaining justification for policy by borrowing strengths from the referred person, usually well-known, high-profile, icon-like person. For example, if somebody recommends Surgeon Lee Guk-jong as health minister, that could be the example. But the dark side of this is first, an expert in one field may prove to be incapable, not necessarily with his or her capability, but people will easily equalize policy failure to that person's character or capacity. So that's one problem. Secondly, this recommendation process or system may go within this small and limited group of fans, not going beyond the general public. So that's one problem. So one metaphor I can use is to compare commercial strategy between Coca-Cola and Pepsi. Coca-Cola has been known to be relying on timeless storyline, whereas Pepsi has been relying on celebrity strategy. The relying on celebrity strategy is weak because if there are a lot of people who do not like that celebrity, they will not buy Pepsi. And likewise, those people who do not like that referred person will not give favor to the policy that that minister is making. So at this moment, this is an early stage of implementation, I have to say.
Mm-hmm. So though it has shown a lot of fairness, there still could be some downsides since it's too early to, judge. Now, let's also touch upon the legal point of this, Professor Lee. The system promised transparency and fairness, the latest system, the nomination system, of course. But under the current laws governing presidential appointments, how binding do you think are these public sourced recommendations, and where do legal constraints actually begin?
Right. So the bottom line is these nominations from the public are not legally binding, right? They're mostly a kind of a political sort of a initiative by the incoming, the administration now, to basically have more participation from the people in terms of leadership and with respect to different ministries, vice minister positions, right, high-level officials within the Korean government. But I mean, formally speaking, when it comes to actual nominations as well as selection, right, that's usually at the power of the president. The president, of course, has the power to nominate, and with the exception of, let's say, the prime minister, the president's ability to nominate and then appoint someone in a position of leadership at a ministry, like, let's say, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, for instance, or Defense, really it lays at the power of the president. So with the exception of the prime minister, which then requires, of course, National Assembly consent and voting, with that exception, the president has the exclusive sort of jurisdiction there. So when it comes to the people now coming into play in terms of making suggestions, as Professor Kim noted, there's pros and cons to that. But from a legal perspective, really, there's no legally binding force that any of this has with respect to the nomination process, as well as the eventual sort of appointment of those officials, because from the constitutional perspective, that power lays exclusively with the president of the country.
Mm-hmm. So that legal distinction really helps clarify what's symbolic and what's structural at this point. Now, Professor Kim, soon after this, President Lee has also launched the so-called People's Mailbox, where citizens can actually directly submit questions online. And according to the presidential office, all submissions are reported to President Lee, and he would personally respond to important ones, significant ones. As a public participation tool, how would you assess this real potential to shape governance, this latest system?
Okay. Currently, we have similar system called e-people, or 신문고, literally meaning drums for the people. And this mailbox, People's Mailbox, is a much advanced, refined system in the sense that President is expected to respond to that. So we can expect two things. One, both this e-people and this people's mailbox is a way to transmit complaint to the top officials, including president. That's one. Secondly, from government point of view, it's possible to extract potentially important policy ideas from hidden valleys. By hidden valleys, I mean existing media or any communication channel because of its capacity limits and also some sort of limitation in collecting and filtering. So there are voices that could not be heard from president's point of view in any country. And this way of people's mailbox may alleviate that issue. But there's a caveat, that is, this should be used as an auxiliary mechanism. That is, if this is overused, then existing ways of collecting and distilling and transmitting ideas will be weakened or withered. So there should be a fine balance between the two.
Mm-hmm. We have to, look at what's the real balance between the actual process that has been made before and also the new process right now. Now, this platform replaced the previous, public petition board as well. Professor Lee, from a constitutional rights perspective, does this more filtered model, or should I say, still respect citizens' right to petition and the need for, transparent dialogue?
Right. So this has to be understood in the context of, Article 26 of the Korean Constitution, which states basically that the citizens have the right to petition in writing to the government or government agency as prescribed by law. And so there's a specific law in Korea called the Petition Act. And that Petition Act basically outlines the procedures by which, people, ordinary people, citizens can then, submit a petition to the government, and the government, depending on the kind of petition, has to respond. So now the question becomes now, with respect to this new system, the people's mailbox, as you mentioned, really goes to the questions about whether and how the filtering process will be with respect to, messages or petitions that are submitted to the president. Now, of course, the president won't literally read every single, message that's submitted through this platform. So there's obviously going to be some amount of filtering with respect to how, certain kinds of messages, right, get to the president, because someone's going to have to read them and make a decision as to how to categorize that petition or message to the president. So I think it really depends on the filtering process with respect to how these messages can get to the president and how then the president responds. So I think the big question really, I think in part is, with respect to filtering, is what the process by which you, let's say, reject certain kinds of messages that are sent to the president, because of course, again, not everything will get to the president himself. And so the concern here is the filtering mechanism, is it going to be arbitrary? What principles are going to be applied with respect to these kinds of messages? I mean, that really is the big question. And of course, transparency. With respect to actually making decisions as to these kinds of messages that are submitted to the president, then is the process for deciding those messages and petitions, how transparent will it be, and what criteria and principles will the Blue House use when it comes to these kinds of messages to the president? So I think that's where the big concern will be as a result of, as a matter of law, to be consistent with the constitutional provisions as well as existing law like the Petition Act. I think that remains to be seen. So I think as this plays out, we'll see more and more, I think, how this will be actually implemented and then make a determination going forward.
Mm-hmm. So a very clear guideline would be necessary in terms of, the filtering process moving forward. Now, let's move on to President Lee's town hall meeting, Professor Kim, in Gwangju. Personally, he listened to local concerns like the stalled military airport relocation. Do you think this kind of model could this be a model for localized, citizen-driven governance moving forward, this kind of town hall meeting?
Yeah, it was positive, but there are pros and cons. Moving airports in downtown areas is one of the toughest policy issues to pursue. And in the sense that President's remark resolved this stalemate issue and let the process moving on, that was a contribution. But if somebody asks me whether this could be generalizable or could be a model, I would be quite cautious because other airport issues and other urban, complex urban issues, they have their own context. And the fact that they have been there as a stalemate for several years means they require very highly refined ways of resolution, not just simple model. So instead of saying generalizable model, I think it was a very nice attempt to break the stalemate. That was the contribution in this case.
Right, so that kind of hands-on style could reshape how local demands are handled, but we'll really have to see how it goes moving forward. Now, staying with this Gwangju initiative, Professor Lee, President Lee has ordered a 6-party government local task force to mediate the airport dispute. Legally speaking, how clear is this framework for such an ad hoc coordination bodies, and could there be risks of overreach, jurisdictional overreach?
Sure. I mean, I think it's clear that the president has the authority by executive order to create these ad hoc bodies. In this case, this coordination body, as you mentioned, basically, a task force that has local officials as well as, ministerial level, national leaders, ministerial level people to get involved in terms of determining, this particular question. But, when it comes to just the issues itself with respect to how this is implemented, that's another question, because as you sort of referred to in your question, the question of jurisdictional overreach, I think, is a real concern because when it comes to these kinds of issues like an airport, I mean, there are obviously, lines of authority when it comes to decision making as with respect to these kinds of domestic issues. So, for instance, when it comes to ministerial authority, it's very clear, right, that the ministry, that the relevant ministry has the power to enact, for example, regulations or, drive certain initiatives when it comes to, certain kinds of matters. And there's, of course, established procedures that have already been set in place by law and statute. So, the concern is maybe if you had an ad hoc body or coordination body, that body can't make, let's say, independent decision making and move the process along by itself. So that's the concern really, is if the ad hoc body makes decisions as to merely coordinating between different ministries as well as local officials. And then the other concern will be with respect to these executive ad hoc bodies is does it undermine local autonomy? Because there's always a push and pull between the central government and local officials when it comes to issues like an airport or anything else that matters that pertain to local matters. And so I think that's really the big question here is, while, as Professor Kim noted, this is a good attempt sort of push the stalemate, right? The question now is, when it comes to the implementation and the workings of such a body, then you'll have to look at, what this actual body does, and will it sort of supplant, existing sort of legislative, statutory, sort of regulatory bodies that have legal authority to make decisions. And so if this is seen as being sort of overreach, I think you're going to see, potential lawsuits, right, and other complaints that then I think may undermine the whole effort to bring in these ad hoc bodies into existence.
Mm-hmm. Now, before we conclude our discussion, Professor Kim, looking back on President Lee's past month, he's been repeatedly framing, his presidency as a turning point for real democracy and citizen-centered governance. So in practical terms, what does that actually look like? And what signs should we watch for the coming months and years ahead?
Yes, and today's panel, together with Professor Lee, we have found that in actual policy decisions, President Lee, based on his own vision, his own version of real democracy and participation, he tried to implement that in real terms. In the cabinet appointment, for example, Labor Minister was former National Railroad worker head, and also he tried to recruit people from relatively underrepresented sectors and segments for the cabinet members. Also, people's mailbox and the public referral system was a fresh idea, still yet to be refined. So in the months to come, we'll have to watch this new institutions, systems moving on, refined. And one word summary will be these new systems are still at the testing the water stage right now. We'll be watching positively.
So definitely a lot of things to discuss with the latest changes by the new government, but let's hope for supportive measures to, address these kinds of concerns that we have right now. I'm afraid we'll have to conclude our discussion for tonight at this point, but thank you so much for your time and for your insights tonight, Professor Kim.
Thank you.
And Professor Lee, of course, we appreciate it so much.
Thanks for having me on the program.
And that'll be all from us on Within the Frame. Be sure to tune in again next time as we continue to explore the stories that matter. Till then, stay informed and engaged.
How to survive in Korea. Cafes. Step 1. Find a seat. Before ordering, find a seat. Laptop ID, smartphone, jacket, whatever that can mark your territory.